Nobody wanted the three little girls. The auction had been going on for hours beneath the burning afternoon sun, and while horses had been sold, wagons had been purchased, and workers had found new employers, the three sisters remained standing alone on the rough wooden platform. The oldest, 12-year-old Emma, wrapped her arms around her younger sisters as tightly as she could. 9-year-old Lily stared at the ground, afraid to look at the crowd. Little Grace, only 6 years old, buried her face against Emma's shoulder and quietly cried. They had already lost everything that mattered. Their parents had died during a harsh winter fever that swept through the territory months earlier. Their small cabin had been taken to settle debts. Now the only thing they had left was each other, and even that seemed about to disappear. The auctioneer cleared his throat and called out again for bids, but the answer was the same as before, silence. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others shook their heads. Some openly laughed. 3 orphan girls were seen as a burden. They couldn't work the fields. They couldn't haul lumber. They couldn't bring profit. To most people in town, they were simply a problem nobody wanted. Emma heard every whisper. She heard people saying the girls would be better off separated. She heard a woman say that taking all 3 would be foolish. She heard a ranch hand joke that feeding them would cost more than they were worth. Each word felt like another stone added to the weight already crushing her heart. Still, she kept her chin up for her sisters. If she cried, they would cry harder. If she broke, they would completely lose hope. So she stood there, pretending to be stronger than she felt. In the front row sat Silas Blackwood, the richest ranch owner for 50 miles in every direction. His expensive suit was spotless despite the dust blowing through town. He leaned back comfortably in his chair and watched the girls with a faint smile. Silas owned more land than anyone else. He controlled most of the businesses. Even the sheriff listened carefully whenever Silas spoke. People feared him because he always got what he wanted. But kindness had never interested him. To Silas, weakness was entertainment. He watched the girls the same way someone might watch a play. When the auctioneer announced one final call, Silas smirked and whispered something to the men beside him. They laughed. Emma looked away. She had learned that powerful people rarely cared about children like them. Then, just as the auctioneer lifted his gavel to close the sale, a voice echoed from the back of the crowd. "I'll take them." The crowd turned. A young woman stood near the entrance of the town square. Dust covered the hem of her simple blue dress. A small suitcase rested beside her boots. She looked tired from traveling, but there was determination in her eyes. Nobody recognized her. The auctioneer frowned. "Miss, do you understand what you're saying?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I'll take all 3. Murmurs spread immediately. People stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Someone laughed. Another person muttered that she clearly didn't know what she was doing. The young woman ignored them all. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she had arrived in town less than an hour earlier. She was a mail-order bride traveling to meet a farmer she had agreed to marry through letters. She owned very little. She knew nobody in town. Yet she was the only person willing to step forward. Emma stared at her in disbelief. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. Nobody had chosen them before. Nobody had ever volunteered to help. Clara walked closer to the platform and smiled gently at the girls. It wasn't a grand smile. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply kind. The kind of smile that made people feel safe. Grace slowly peeked from behind Emma's shoulder. Lily wiped her eyes. For the first time that day, a tiny spark of hope appeared. Silas Blackwood watched the scene with amusement. "This should be entertaining," he said quietly. The paperwork was completed quickly. Within minutes, the girls climbed down from the platform and stood beside Clara. None of them knew what would happen next. They only knew they were still together. As they walked away from the auction square, Emma finally found the courage to speak. "Why did you choose us?" Clara looked at her for a moment before answering. "Because nobody else did." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Nobody had ever given her a simpler or more honest answer. That evening Clara finally arrived at the small farm belonging to Henry Dawson, the man she had exchanged letters with for nearly a year. Henry wasn't wealthy. In fact, he struggled to keep his farm running. His house was small. His clothes were patched. His hands were rough from years of hard labor. But unlike many people in town, Henry's first reaction wasn't shock or anger when he saw the 3 girls. He listened quietly as Clara explained everything. Then he smiled. If they're family now, he said, they're welcome here. Clara felt relief she couldn't describe. The girls looked stunned. Nobody had welcomed them anywhere for a very long time. Life on the farm wasn't easy. Some nights there wasn't enough food for everyone to eat comfortably. Clara learned how to stretch every dollar. She mended old clothes instead of buying new ones. Henry worked longer hours than ever before. The girls helped however they could. Yet despite the hardships, something beautiful slowly began to grow inside that little farmhouse. Laughter returned. Grace stopped waking up screaming from nightmares every night. Lily began singing while helping Clara cook. Emma started smiling again without realizing it. For the first time since losing their parents, the girls felt something they thought was gone forever. They felt loved. Months passed. Seasons changed. The family grew closer. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy about it. Silas Blackwood noticed that people in town had begun talking about Clara and Henry. They admired Clara's kindness. They respected Henry's generosity. They praised the way the girls were thriving. Silas hated it. He was used to being the center of attention. He was used to being admired, feared, and obeyed. Now conversations often focused on a poor farmer and a mail-order bride instead. The more he heard their names, the more irritated he became. One morning he rode to the farm with several men. Henry greeted him politely, but Silas didn't return the courtesy. He handed over a stack of documents and informed Henry that the property owed a large amount of unpaid taxes. Henry stared at the papers in confusion. The numbers made no sense. The dates were strange. Clara immediately sensed something was wrong. But arguing with Silas Blackwood was dangerous. Most people who challenged him lost everything. Silas smiled coldly. If the debt isn't paid within 90 days, the farm becomes mine. Then he turned his horse and rode away. Fear settled over the farmhouse like a storm cloud. The amount demanded was impossible. Even if Henry worked every hour of every day, he couldn't earn enough in time. The girls overheard the conversation. That night Grace cried herself to sleep. Lily asked if they were going to lose their home again. Emma sat awake staring through the window for hours. Clara hugged them and promised she would do everything possible, but deep down she was terrified too. Weeks passed. Henry worked harder than ever. Clara sold quilts and handmade clothing. The girls helped with chores from sunrise until dark. Still, they couldn't earn enough money. Meanwhile Silas continued spreading rumors that the farm would soon belong to him. Some people suggested Clara should leave town while she still could. Others said taking the girls had brought bad luck. Clara listened quietly and kept moving forward. She didn't complain. She didn't surrender. She simply refused to stop trying. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Emma was cleaning the attic when she noticed a loose floorboard beneath an old trunk. Curious, she lifted it. Hidden underneath was a small wooden box covered in dust. She carried it downstairs and showed it to Clara. Inside were dozens of old letters and documents. Most seemed ordinary at first. But then Clara noticed a familiar name. Blackwood. Her heart began pounding. She spent hours reading every page. The documents revealed land agreements from decades earlier. Illegal transactions. Forged signatures. Hidden payments. The deeper Clara investigated, the more shocking the truth became. Years ago, Silas's father had stolen property from struggling families throughout the region, including Henry's grandparents. The farm Henry lived on had never legally belonged to the Blackwood family. The debt Silas was claiming wasn't real. It was part of a much larger deception that had remained hidden for years. Clara barely slept that night. She and Henry reviewed every document again and again. The evidence was overwhelming. The challenge would be convincing anyone powerful enough to act. Silas had influence everywhere. Yet for the first time, hope felt stronger than fear. News of the discovery spread quietly. A public hearing was scheduled. The entire town gathered to watch. Silas arrived looking completely confident. He expected another easy victory. When he saw Clara carrying a box full of papers, he laughed. He believed nobody would dare challenge him. The hearing began. Silas spoke first. He portrayed himself as an honest businessman protecting his interests. Many people nodded because they had heard the same story for years. Then Clara stood. Her voice trembled slightly, but she never looked away. One by one, she presented the documents. The room grew quieter with every page. Questions were asked. Witnesses were called. Elderly residents came forward with stories they had been too afraid to tell before. Former employees described how records had been altered. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. Silas's confidence disappeared. For the first time in anyone's memory, he looked frightened. By evening the decision was announced. The taxes against Henry's farm were declared fraudulent. The property legally belonged to the Dawson family. Investigations into Silas's business dealings would begin immediately. The room erupted with emotion. Some people cried. Others applauded. Silas stood frozen as years of power slipped away. When officers approached him, he looked directly at Clara. He expected celebration. He expected revenge. Instead he saw quiet dignity. The same quiet dignity she had carried since the day she arrived in town. Months later, more secrets surfaced. Families recovered stolen land. Corrupt officials lost their positions. Businesses once controlled by fear began operating honestly. The town slowly transformed. As for the three sisters, their lives blossomed. Grace grew into a cheerful young girl whose laughter filled every room. Lily discovered a talent for music that amazed everyone who heard her play. Emma became known for helping orphaned children find homes, determined to ensure nobody experienced the loneliness she once felt. Years later, on a warm summer evening, the family sat together outside the farmhouse watching the sunset. Golden light covered the fields. The girls were no longer frightened children standing on an auction platform. They were daughters. They were sisters. They were loved. Emma looked at Clara and asked a question she had carried in her heart for years. Why did you really choose us that day? Clara smiled softly. Because everyone else saw 3 problems. Emma waited. Clara squeezed her hand. But I saw 3 daughters. Tears filled Emma's eyes. Around them, the field swayed gently in the evening breeze. Henry smiled from his chair. Grace laughed at something Lily said. And for a moment, the world felt exactly as it should. The crowd that once rejected them was long gone. The powerful man who mocked them had lost everything he built through greed. But the family created through kindness remained. And it all began with one simple decision made by a stranger who refused to walk away when everyone else did. Sometimes justice arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it begins with a courtroom victory. And sometimes it begins with a tired young woman standing at the back of a dusty auction, looking at 3 frightened little girls and saying 4 words that changed every life forever: I'll take them all.